Just a quick show of hands from the audience. How many people agree with Dr. Lewis that there should be a state history exam in Massachusetts? Any opposed? All right, very good.
I reluctantly agree that there's a need for the test. I do believe that there are some encroachments that can be stated that do occur and may occur when you essentially limit the testing to a test, or rather teaching to a test. The fact, however, is, as both Will and Anders have mentioned, is that without the test, we are seeing the deterioration of the teaching of history and civics. I don't know if you heard this week where Washington, D.C. schools are no longer going to be teaching civic education in their K through 12. It's like, excuse me? I mean, to Anders' point, you know, English, I think I have a perspective that I get annoyed when I hear that education and its purpose is to provide a good workforce. What happened with education as being the means by which we are able to be good citizens, work with each other, and be able to simply live within the same state, country, or world without being only focused on the fact that we need to make sure we get good jobs? I adhere to the fact that if we have good teaching and we're educating our masses, they're automatically going to be able to get good jobs. I think we're being too limiting in our focus when we start saying that the purpose of education is to get good jobs. And I'm tired of that kind of rhetoric, which I don't think serves us well, and as a result allows for decision makers to turn around and say to us, well, you don't really need history for work, you don't really need civics for work, geography. In other words, we can throw in, a whole bunch of different courses and say, well, they don't particularly lead us to a good working force. I would disagree with that. Getting along in a global world tells us immediately that logic really is flawed.
Christina, let me put you on the spot, since you are the room representative, I'm afraid, of a demographic that is a little bit closer to K-12 education than the rest of us. Can you, when you think of your K-12 experience, and especially even your high school experience, can you recall any signals that you got, overt or subtle, that said to you, I'm here to become a citizen?
I would think certainly. But I mean, I think this speaks to the point I made earlier that I was taught by teachers with a great deal of enthusiasm and investment. And I think it speaks also to a point that wasn't made in the Pioneer Institute's paper, but I think is of equal value and importance, is that there's a sense that we're talking about an age past and lamenting over a time when civic education was put at the forefront, but our current public policies are made by the people who were brought up in that system. And so if civic education was so important then, why are we struggling with the structure and the framework in which we're making public policies? So that's the first point, but I think equally important to a strong education system is a strong community and a strong investment in education in that community and a strong family. If a student isn't getting the focus on education at home, it's not just the teacher's responsibility to provide that. They have 30, 35 kids a day. The whole community needs to be invested in that. And I don't think we show that kind of signal to students when we, town after town, votes on a local level not to increase funding for education. I think it's I think it's a really important signal that we're sending as a community. So certainly, we were encouraged to volunteer. We were encouraged to kind of grapple with some of these topics. We did a variety of projects. We were told we're being educated to become good citizens, but I think it's important to live that.
Your reply, which thank you for the segue, it hints at what is, for lack of a better description, often referred to as service learning, which is very much in vogue in American schools. Just a quick response from everybody. Is service learning, does it help? Does it hurt? Does it have no impact on what we're discussing whatsoever? Is it utterly a different thing? Roger, what do you think?
Service learning without a component that deals with public policy is going to be disastrous. Don't get me wrong, service learning is great, but it has a non-lasting appeal. It is not going to be something that is going to carry on. All of our students, and adults for that matter, need foundational understanding of what our government is all about. What does this government stand for? How can we say we are we the people, and yet we don't even understand what the foundational principles upon which our country is based? And I think that's one of a huge flaw that we have. And so service learning on its surface is great. But how many times have you heard students do service learning with the following statement? Well, we cleaned up the cemetery because the town wouldn't do it. Essentially negating or putting the government of our communities down because A, they don't have the means or whatever. So it's essentially some service learning that does not have what I would call a public policy dimension, has the capacity of making it appear that government is bad.
I'm going to take the slight risk of disagreeing with my mentor, only slightly. I think service learning is incredibly important. It was definitely part of my high school curriculum. But I don't think it needs a necessary precursor to get a child involved in their community. I don't think it needs to be rationalized by a curriculum. I think a curriculum provides an excellent opportunity to either learn from that experience or to be inspired to have that experience. But I think investment in an individual's community should happen as soon as possible.
Well, first of all, service learning is supposed to be voluntary, never is, but for me, it's always been an example of the sort of the progressive interest in social action rather than doing schoolwork, which I always characterize as put down those books and no one gets hurt. But just one other thing about a signal about history. And Diane Ravitch used to say that history in the high schools was the subject in which the largest number of teachers were teaching out of field. I was an English major in college. I was guilty. But there's an old joke, which you probably heard anyway, but they say, it's very hard to know the last name of all the social studies teachers in the United States, but the first name of half of them is Coach.
I have certainly no problem with service learning, but as a substitute I do have a problem with it if it is intended as a substitute for engagement with American history and American civics. Earlier this morning we were talking about the Founding Fathers. Dr. Verkova was talking about the Founding Fathers. Just think about what the Founding Fathers said about the importance of history. All the Founding Fathers were deeply steeped in history. They read history. They considered history. And they knew that the study of history, the study of our nation's history, was absolutely essential if we are going to survive in a democracy. When Ben Franklin finished up the Constitution, he was asked, how'd everything turn out? And he said, well, you have a republic if you can keep it. Can we keep it? We can keep it if we consider, reflect, and engage the ideas that we're founded upon. Right now, we are not doing that. We need to do that.
I'll just add to Andrew's comment that I'm agnostic personally on service learning. When I think of civics, I think of civic skills, knowledge, skills, and dispositions, in that order. I think a service learning program can create a civic disposition, but ultimately, I think I agree with Roger that if there's not a foundational knowledge to that, you're casting your seeds upon barren land. I'm going to ask one more question before we throw it open to audience questions. I spend a lot of time at education conferences, and it's buzzword heaven, blah, 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 innovation, blah, 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 technology. When you talk to policy folks, it's blah, blah, blah choice, it's blah, blah, blah funding mechanisms, it's a lot of structures. Just quickly, do any of you see anything either from technology or from policy that would give us optimism that there are at least some signs of life in K-12 education that would lead to better outcomes history-wise for the majority of American students? I think I have my answer.
Well, I definitely do believe that there are potential for a tremendous amount of good. But again, with the tremendous amount of technology at hand, it also makes it very difficult to be assured that history is not just simply going to be someone else's lies that get permeated over the internet. And how do you distinguish between the two? And to me, the role of the schools is to create the student information and understanding that allows them throughout the rest of their lives to be able to distinguish between that which is a lie and that which is a prevarication and that which is the truth. In other words, we need to be able to make these distinctions. If we don't teach it, then how can they make those kinds of judgments throughout the rest of their lives without being swayed by someone who knows maybe a little bit more than them and has a particular point of view that they'd like to have shared? So I'm concerned about that aspect of too much information and not enough understanding of how can I have enough of a foundation so that I can make the necessary judgments. Having said that, there are some things that I think we can do that I think are happening but are not focusing on history and social science at this point and need to be. One, there's a huge focus at the elementary levels on literacy. That's the code word that we're now using, in this early 21st century. Well, why not use literacy, or why not use history and social science as your means of assuring understanding of what you read and knowing what it is that you're reading about? To me, if I were an administrator, obviously, after today, no one would want that. The fact of the matter is that I would be looking at social studies and history, and I'd be saying, okay, let's go and use that to teach and help in the form of literacy.
Exactly.
And I think another way we can probably do it is by allowing opportunities for our students to do things, service learning, being a part of it, with some kind of foundational understanding about, what it is to be an American and living within this constitutional democracy. So I think that those possibilities exist. The program that I'm the state coordinator and taught for many years, called We the People, that Christina was just talking about earlier allows for what I call the study of content, immersion in content, but giving students the skills to be able to take that content and apply as well as analyze so that they can take that information and internalize it. And that, to me, is what true learning should be. It's a combination, it's a balancing between sufficient amount of content with a sufficient amount of skill learning that allows for the students to leave and continue to learn more as they become adults. And if I can just put a plug here, because I happen to see her sitting in the audience, I would like to recognize Christine Forsgaard, the teacher at the Academy of Notre Dame, whose class won the state championship for the We the People this past weekend.
Bravo.
I'm going to be really bold. I'm usually not. I teach at a Catholic school. But that's a point. I teach at a Catholic school. Number 2, a private school. Something's going on in public education. We have the flexibility at our school. I have the support of my administration. I have the support of other teachers. I have the support of parents to make their kids work hard and have a higher standard. And we're very blessed that we have Roger to keep this program going despite the fact that the one thing that Congress could cut was We the People funding, which is interesting. And I also have to just say a thank you to Jack Rakoff, because I knew I saw this a while ago that this program was going to be given, and I thought, wait a minute. He's here on Monday morning from California, and there's a We the People competition on Saturday. Maybe he's going to be there. I told my students, we already have your books in my classroom. Every single unit was going over your material before the competition, and I think that's one of the reasons why they were right on top of all their stuff, because I thought that you'd be there. So thank you very much. And so to the backhanded appreciation. But I'd just like to say one more thing, if I could. One of the things that's happened at a public school not far from me, and a teacher who's very committed to civic education, they had a choice at his school to add another history class. And he was really pushing for a We the People class all to himself. And instead, the class that they are going to fund and put forward is a class on film and history. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's not just a competition between funding, it's a competition between what's best for children. I don't know how they made that decision, and I don't mean to second guess them. But sometimes I think the tail wags the dog here. How many kids will actually enroll in a class that's going to be fun and you'll get to see movies, as opposed to a class that you're going to be reading the Federalist Papers and you're going to know all your amendments and you're going to know the Constitution backwards and forwards. And I mean, my students have suffered with me, and that's why parents are important, because even though there's these kids who are, I'm sure, complaining, the parents didn't call me up or call up my administrators. So I think that it's a community, and it's a community effort. And it's not just about science and math, it's what decisions are made within social studies too, what classes are going to be taught. So anyway, but thank you very much for bearing with me.
I was not in the room, obviously, when that decision was made, but I would bet you real money I know exactly what happened. It's the skills orientation that my mentor, E.D. Hirsch, refers to all the time. If you get the idea in your head that, well, it's not important that kids know any particular history, instead we want them to have the skills of thinking like an historian, well, then what does it matter if it's film, if it's the Federalist Papers, etc.? I don't agree with this, obviously, but that, I think, is the mindset that has taken hold. We have obviously transitioned to audience questions, so let's continue with that in the few minutes that we have left. Yes, sir. And please introduce yourself, if you would.
Quick question again. I would agree that the deep research paper is an important part of education, But when I see the assignments my kids get on that, it turns into the skills of being a researcher. How do you get the balance right between teaching kids citation form and teaching kids not to use Wikipedia, and teaching kids, how to do it deeply, or rather than one on how many cards you get, how many cards are in your stack, and how many drafts did you put out before turning out the final product?
Well, my experience with the literacy community in general is that they are more into technique than content. In fact, Lucy Calkins, who's the dean of reading and writing, according to some people in the United States, once told me that, she said, I teach writing, I don't get into content that much. Now, I've written several articles about this. It seems to me that setting students loose in the maze of processes before they have anything to say is just a recipe for disaster. So the most important thing is for the student to read until they have something they want to write about. Then you help them write that. The other thing is that you start in first grade. I have people say, my seniors can't write 12 pages. I said, well, what if they'd written 11 pages last year or 10 pages the year before that? I mean, we have Pop Warner. We have Little League. We don't ask high school seniors to go out and play football against 6'8", 280-pound opponents, never having played before. So we have to take writing seriously, and we have to take reading seriously. But I wanted to speak to the earlier point about things that are going on in school. There are some wonderful things that are going on in school all the time. Model UN, Lincoln-Douglas debates, mock trial, in which kids have to prepare, have to gain knowledge, and present it in public. And the Concord Review has a registered trademark of varsity academics. Imagine how difficult it would be to get a registered trademark of varsity athletics. We don't take varsity academics seriously, and we don't give kids we don't give freshmen a chance to see the serious intellectual work of their peers as seniors. I mean, they'd be blown away, and it would be inspiring. I had some similar experience when I entered my boarding school. And one of those seniors got up and talked, and I thought, wow. 4 years later, I was president of Student Body, too. So, this idea of emulation of excellence in one's peers is very important, as important in academics as it is in athletics.
If I could just speak to a couple of threads that were picked up on about technology and about papers. I think as folks who teach history should really embrace history. I tend to be rather old-fashioned when it comes to teaching history. I think history itself is, if taught right, is so engaging and so fascinating that you don't need technology. You don't need little else except the story itself. You mentioned the Constitutional Convention, and I understand that for some students that might be a struggle, but I think if it's taught well, it's endlessly fascinating. I remember when I was a child, I read Miracle at Philadelphia by Catherine
Drinker-Bowen.
Yep, and I was blown away by it. I was so amazed by it. If you tell the story of the Constitutional Convention, how this summer of 1787, and it's hot, and they come in and they close all the windows and the doors, and they have, who was that one drunkard, Luther Martin, I think it was. And you get into the story and you get into the debates, and then you drop the Federalist Papers. The kids are into it. You're hooked. They are hooked to the story, so they're going to engage the content. They're going to engage the Federalist Papers if you lay the groundwork for it. And you can go on and on. You can talk about Washington's crossing of the Delaware, the Battle of Gettysburg, and Pickett's charge. If you really tell the story and you get into the people and the characters, they don't need Facebook. They don't need whatever latest movie. They will embrace history. History is tremendously enriching, tremendously fascinating, and it's incumbent upon us, the teachers of history, to make it so.
You wanted to say something, Christine?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I wanted to pick up on the technology thread. I confess myself a Luddite in almost everything but education. I think technology shouldn't be something that we look at as the antithesis of a primary document, but a way to enhance it. I think that if you're afraid to embrace technology in your classroom through blended learning models, through ways of supplementing an education and not replacing traditional models of educating, you're really doing your students a disservice. I think one of the ways that students engage with information in general now is through technology. And if you show them ways to find primary resources, to do research online in a way that's responsible, to play games that hit topics, it's a way to continue to learn outside the classroom, and I think that should be encouraged.
We are just about out of time. I want to be respectful of people's time and leave time for the book signings, but if there's one more real quick question to the panelists, and the panelists can be disciplined to answer the question very, very quickly. I see, yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to ask a question with regard to policy and teacher training and development, professional development. And I do want to thank Dr. Dotson, Dr. Rajak for their presentations and the panel. This has been extremely enlightening in terms of perspectives. But in terms of institutional engagement with teachers that represent historic content, what kind of policy development can be done, or what are your ideas with respect to that in involving institutions in professional training for teachers? Because at the Museum of African American History, we have teacher institutes that we've had annually every year for about 10 years now, in conjunction with Suffolk University and the Boston Public Schools. And we look at what teachers may be afraid of teaching with respect to slavery and the tough stuff of American history, as coined by Drs. Horton, James and Lois Horton, and look at how difficult some of the mythologies are to deconstruct in American history for teachers when they're facing their students with truth, with primary documentation, whether it be online or not. And looking at the kind of presentation that was brought to us by the two doctors who spoke earlier as being really relevant material to change perspectives.
Can I summarize your
yes.
question briefly to say how prepared are our teachers to, in fact, teach history?
Right, and look at that as a part of policy making.
What do we think?
There are a lot of, or there were, I should say, a lot of possibilities in professional development for history teachers, social studies teachers. But I have to say that that's on the wing. What has happened is whatever funding that school districts are giving for professional development in the last 3 years has been devoted primarily to English and math, nothing to the other disciplines. And so therefore, when you are conducting, as I have done, different training sessions, I invariably get, well, we can't do it because there's no funding allowed and we're not allowed to leave the school, okay, for that. Only English and math teachers can do so. So we're finding a lot of a reduction of the pool of teachers who would be able to use professional development is dwindling. Is there a lot out there? There is an awful lot out there. I mean, to be honest with you, civic education in the last, I would say, 20 to 30 years has really ratcheted up. Thanks to Dr. Rakoff and his books, okay, on the founders, which, I mean, think about all of the books on the founders that we've seen in the last 30 years. We have a lot of material for us to learn from, to gain more information, to help our students. All of that is there. Now we're being challenged to find the time and the courses in order to do that with our students. So we have more than what I had when I was a student, okay, in college, but we don't have the means to access it as much, and obviously give more and more of our teachers the opportunity to use the materials and teach them as they could.
Dr. Lewis.
I just totally agree with what Roger just said. And to add one other thing, I think what's really, really important in professional development is that teachers be trained to know something about the content. What I have seen as a teacher is one professional development after another professional development that just amounts to babysitting. New techniques in how to make your kids feel good, new techniques in how to manage a classroom. All of that is important. I'm not, I don't wish to dispute that. But if all you're doing is that and you're not engaging in the content, all you're doing is babysitting. Now, you could be a good babysitter, you could be a bad babysitter. But at the end of the day, babysitting is not terribly fruitful. What's fruitful is to engage in the content. A few years ago, I remember Gordon Wood, who's a terrific historian of the American Revolution. He came and to a Pioneer Institute meeting, and he spoke, and we were asked a similar question about, what kind of professional development should teachers of the Revolution have. And I think the best response is to say, well, go read Gordon Wood.
Great. We're going to leave it there. Will, quickly, please.
Very, very quick. I think the best use of technology and the best teacher training and student training can be found in Neil Postman's comment that the best tool for distance learning is a book.
We're going to leave it there, and thank you to our panelists. And here's Jim with some last words.
Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you, Robert. Appreciate it. Before we close up, I'm going to go right to books. I just wanted to also recognize Mike Sentence, who's here, who worked together with Tom Birmingham on the 1993 Massachusetts Education Reform Act, which has borne so much fruit for the state and also included a provision that required high-quality instruction in U.S. history as well as testing, something that we are urging for the state. I do think there's one question I wanted to ask, I wasn't able to, which was a question for Will. We won't get into it now. I'll ask you afterwards.
Okay.
Which is, do you want to have kids ratchet up from a one-page writing requirement in grade 1 to 12th grade where they're writing 12 pages? Would you rather have that? Would you rather have an MCAS test? But we'll get into that later on. Right now, there's going to be book signing here. Dr. Dodson as well as Dr. Rakoff will be signing the following 4 books. Jubilee, The Emergence of African American Culture, and In Motion, the African American Migration Experience, both from Dr. Dodson, and then Original Meanings, Politics and Ideas in the Making of the Constitution, Revolutionaries, A New History of the Invention of America, both from Dr. Rakoff. Pick them up. It's great stuff. Thank you very much for being here this morning. We appreciate it, and we appreciate panelists, Robert, as well as our professors here this morning. Thank you.